Okay. Small technical issue, but we're there. All right. So again, thank you so much for being here. As you all know, given the current climate, a lot of education is moving online. And so I'm going to be going through a bit of the psychology behind education and then a bunch of tips of how to learn more effectively online. So the reason I chose not to go completely into just tips on how to learn online is I feel like if you understand the concepts behind the education and why schools are designed the way they are, or at least have the tools that educators have to know why they've designed them, then you'll be able to navigate how to teach yourself online in a more effective manner. So just as a rough outline for today, I'm going to do a very short introduction to ReCoded and what we do for all those who aren't familiar with ReCoded. And then I'm going to go into productivity psychology, habit formation, and then educational psychology. So what we could do to improve our learning. Then we'll close off with 20 minutes of questions and answers. So the ReCoded team will be noting your questions. So we're going to leave all the questions to the end of the presentation. And then I'm going to close off with some final tips about learning in general. And just so you all know, this presentation is recorded. And the other thing is we'll be sending out a survey afterwards to hear your thoughts on how the speaker session went. All right. So we move on to introduction to ReCoded. So ReCode is a nonprofit that started back in 2015. And what we do at ReCode is we prepare conflict-affected and vulnerable youth to enter the digital economy as developers, entrepreneurs, and technology leaders. So we work on many different programs, and these programs include coding bootcamps. We are starting a design bootcamp in the next few months. We also are designing a program to upskill university lecturers in Iraq. We also do an entrepreneurial program at the moment in Istanbul, and before that we had a program in Iraq as well. We also have a co-working space that is unfortunately closed down at the moment in Erbil, but we hope to open it very, very soon, which includes the training space, an event space, community building. We have members who come in and work from there. We also do space rental. We do a lot of events like the one we have right now, so speaker sessions, we have alumni gatherings. And then finally, we also have a digital agency, which is a for-purpose company to provide job opportunities for those who graduate from our bootcamps. This is an image from our first bootcamp back in 2016 or late 2015. And we've come a very long way, but it's very, very nice to always remember everything that happened over the years. So we always put this picture into our presentation to remember where we came from. We work in 3 countries. We work in Turkey, Iraq, and Yemen. So we have another bootcamp starting in Yemen soon. And we've operated in multiple cities across Iraq and Turkey. So Istanbul, Gaziantep, and Şanlıurfa in Turkey. And we've operated in Baghdad, Basra, and Karakosh, in addition to Erbil, and now in Mosul as well. So we need to update this slide. So without any further ado, we're going to dive straight in. So I'm going to start with productivity, and then I'm going to go into habit formation, and then I'm going to give much more context on educational psychology. So one of the biggest hurdles of learning from home or learning online is managing your time. And this is why I've started with productivity. This is something we see a lot. When you're learning in a classroom, everything is organized for you. So your schedule is there, you have class time, and it's much easier to navigate how to split your time to have time dedicated to learning. It's much harder when you're sitting at home. It's also much harder when your bedroom is 2 minutes from where you're going to be learning. So the key principles of being productive is to reduce stress by having clarity on what you need to do. And when you have that clarity, you have a sense of control of everything you're doing. And the busier we are and the more we want to learn, the more we want to do. So if you have a job and you're learning on the side, or you're studying and you're also learning, or if you have your family, this becomes very difficult. And a lot of psychological books or psychology books focus on decluttering the brain. So removing what you need to remember so you can focus and be creative on what you need to get done. And in this aspect, in this situation, we're talking about learning specifically. But you're not going to be able to learn effectively if you're thinking about, oh, I need to pay that bill and I need to go cook dinner. And just organizing your thoughts and everything you need to do enables you to focus on learning. So we want to free up the mind. We want to have clarity on what we need to do. And then we get to a sense of flow. So what I mean by flow, for those who haven't heard the flow before, have you ever felt in the zone or being very productive? So you start a task, or you start to read a book, or you're on a course, or you're doing something, and you just lose yourself. So time doesn't matter anymore, and you're completely productive. And there's a certain sense of happiness around that as well. So you're not caring about getting to the end goal, you just enjoy the whole process. And that's what we define as flow here. So flow usually happens when your skill matches the challenge at hand. So to give you an example, if you're starting to play football and you're trying to kick the ball against the wall, it's super easy to start doing that. But very quickly, you're going to be able to do that very easily. And you're going to start getting into boredom. And your skill has surpassed the challenge. So then you start looking at tricks and maneuvers. And I mean, I'm not great at football, so I'm not going to go into depth here. But as you become better skilled, you want to up the challenge. If you up the challenge way too much, way beyond your skill level, then you become anxious and you lose motivation. So there's this balance that needs to be achieved between your skill and the challenge you're being exposed to. And this is something you have to keep in mind when you're learning online or at home. So this is the first principle here, other than decluttering your mind and trying to be more productive, this sense of flow. And this is something that you need to balance all the way through your learning journey. If you feel something is too easy and you're getting bored, you start doing something hard. If you think you're anxious, start breaking it down and simplifying it. So just a quick activity. This is a speaker session. You don't need to share this or anything. But if you want to be advancing how you do things, we're going to take 30 seconds. Just quickly write down 3 things you want to learn in the next 3 months. Just 3 things. I'm going to give you literally 30 seconds to do this. And the reason I'm asking you to do this is that if you want to start planning from today and from now, this will be super helpful. It could literally be, I want to learn tennis, I want to learn football, and I want to read this book. And that's it. We have filmmaking here. So the next step, after you've written those very quickly, then you reflect on these just for a second. This is part of a much bigger process. I just want to expose you to the process of prioritizing your learning. So you jot down those 3 things and then you reflect on them. So which ones are more important? So in my example, I said football, tennis, and reading a book. To me, I'm going to prioritize the book that I want to read. Then I'm going to put tennis. Obviously, COVID, that's going to go. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do football. So it's just basically going to be that book. And now I know what I need to learn first. And this process is done no matter how many courses and how many books and how many presentations you want to go through. Prioritizing learning is super important here. It's more important because you have unlimited time and you can lose yourself in a certain topic. All right, so something you can do tomorrow, and this is basically, we're wrapping up productivity. That's just basically a tool I want to expose you to, of jotting down what you're trying to learn, prioritizing them, and decluttering your mind. I don't know why we have someone is scribbling on my screen. But taking that further, you can make a list of everything you want to learn. So something to do after this course or tomorrow, whenever you have free time. Jot down everything you want to learn when you're at home. Then you can sit down, prioritize them, and then you start planning out your week and becoming more productive. All right, so the next thing that's super important when you're learning online is habit formation. So when you're, when you're in a class, there's a schedule. let's say school. Let's take school as an example. You know you have to be in school this time. You have those classes. You have your schedule. That's all thought out for you. Or even for the program like ReCode boot camps, we have a schedule. We know when the classes are. We know when assignments are due. When you're learning online, and depending on the program you're working on, it changes. So what we do in ReCode, we do a flipped classroom model. So a lot of the learning is done outside of the classroom, and then we come and practice. So problem solving is in class. So let's say you want to spend 10 hours a week learning. It's very helpful to have the habit of setting that time and being able to achieve that. A lot of students ask about not being able to do all the work they want to, or procrastinating. This is where this really helps, building those habits. So by changing, we all have hundreds of habits. There's loads of them. And habits are like, so this is a quote that I pulled it out from a book earlier today. So habits are like atoms of our lives. Each one is a fundamental unit that contributes to our overall improvement. So every small change in the habits you have will change your life for the better. So the more conscious we are of the habits we have and how we improve them, and removing the habits we don't like and adding habits we do, all those small improvements, each one will, let's say, bring a 0.5% improvement to your life. But you change 10 habits and you've got a 5% improvement. Day on day, that will improve your life drastically. So every habit book that I've read, and there's been a few, there's a 3-part cycle for habits in general. So you have the cue, you have the routine, you have the reward. So if we take the simple example, if you're waking up in the morning and you have your alarm clock that goes off in the morning, you wake up, you brush your teeth, and then you have a feeling of success, being healthy, and you're like, well, I brush my teeth every morning. It's great. You might also have a minty fresh sensation in your mouth if you use minted toothpaste. So let's break this down. So the cue is the alarm clock. That initiates the habit. The activity you associate with the cue is brushing your teeth, and the reward is the feeling of success. And every single habit includes this. So if you have a habit, and this goes to everything. So let's say you smoke cigarettes, or you wake up in the morning and spend 2 hours on Facebook, whatever the habit is, and you want to change it. Every habit is associated with this reward at the end of the cycle. And when you have this reward, you start building a craving for that reward, irrelevant if it's a good or bad habit. So the key rule here, where people struggle with habits, is they try to change the craving or to resist the craving. And this is a recipe for not being able to get that habit changed. So what you do, you don't try to resist the craving, you redirect it. So you take the cue and you have the reward. You just change the routine that's involved in it. So if I give you another example, let's say I love eating cheesecake, okay? And I eat cheesecake every day. Every time I finish work, I decide I'm gonna have cheesecake. So end of work is the cue. The routine is eating that cheesecake, and I feel great after cheesecake. I just changed that. Maybe I'll change it to eating, I don't know what's healthy, like a healthy smoothie or something, I don't know. But changing the routine is the key to changing the habit while still having that reward. And the reason I'm going to habits much more is because we need to build a habit for learning. So you wake up in the morning, it's Ramadan, so you don't have breakfast, you get up, maybe you do a bit of exercise, and then you start learning. That could be a habit that you build into your life, even if it's like 20 minutes. But that gives you a habit of learning every single day. And it could be weekly, whatever works for your schedule. But I wanted to give a tool or a methodology or framework to start building those habits in your life. Because when you're learning online, these are super critical, because you have to define your own schedule and you have to be responsible for everything you do when you're at home. Okay, so we're going to do another activity very quickly. Literally another 30 seconds. You write down a habit that you'd like to change. And once you have that habit, I'll give you 30 seconds or 15 seconds. Okay, so now that you've halved, there's no need to rush. I can slow down. Okay, so once you have that habit, you break it down to a cue, a routine, and a reward. And now think about how you change that routine. Okay. So I want to give you a real life example. So Starbucks had this, so for those who don't know, I'm sure you all know Starbucks, but it's a coffee shop in all worldwide. So Starbucks had this big issue where customers would come in and in some occasions will be really, they would shout and cause a problem on stuff, and the staff would not know how to deal with this. So what Starbucks wanted to do is to build a habit for all their employees on how to deal with the customer service. And this is a real life example. So they built out the latte method. And the latte method basically is listening to the customer, acknowledging their complaints, taking action, thanking the customer, and then explaining why the issue occurred. And initially, the staff did not enjoy doing this. It became like a routine that they had to think about every single time. They had it on the walls. But very quickly, they started seeing a massive improvement with customers. Even when a customer was very upset, going through this habit, every time the cue was the customer coming in and not being happy. The staff member went through this habit and this routine, and the results were amazing. And Starbucks grew to become one of the biggest coffee chains in the world. So I know this is a very simple task. Something you can start from tomorrow is make your bed every morning. So researchers have actually gone out and tested this, and it's shown that doing small tasks every morning can boost productivity throughout the day. Doing something very, very small in the morning can actually improve your productivity all the way through, and it gives you that sense of achievement that will ripple through your whole day. The other thing you can do is something called habit stacking. So if you want to build a new habit, what you can think of is what habits you have that you already follow and start adding routines to that habit. So let's say you wake up in the morning, and we'll go back to brushing your teeth and outside of Ramadan having coffee. But you can add, okay, that's what I do every time I wake up. In addition to that, I'm going to read 2 pages of a book. So now you're habit stacking. You're taking an existing habit and adding something to it. That's a very, very easy way of adding routines with a much lower activation barrier. So then a big question that comes from students is motivation. And a lot of the times, so I'm going to read the quote first. So many people think they lack motivation, and what they really lack is clarity. So sometimes people are unmotivated to do things because they don't know what they need to do. This comes back to productivity and making that list, or because they feel like they're in a continuous habit that they can't get out of, and they don't have clarity on how to achieve that. So the aim for what we've talked about so far is to give you a bit of insight on habits, productivity, and how to build out your day-to-day. And now we're going to go into learning psychology. So more of the meaty stuff, something a bit more into neuroscience and psychology, and trying to build out some of the things that we really look at when we're designing programs in ReCode. So growth versus fixed mindset. So everyone in ReCode is aware of this. We really talk about this a lot. So what do we mean by a growth and a fixed mindset? So I hope this animation works. Okay, here we go. So intelligence is static, and it's a desire to look smart. Whereas in a growth mindset, that's fixed mindset. In growth mindset, the idea is intelligence can be developed, and it's a desire to learn. So if I'm not good in something today, I will be good with practice. Whereas a fixed mindset is more, I am either good at math or I'm not good at math. There is no room for improvement there. Fixed mindset individuals avoid challenges. They see a new challenge and they turn around and say, oh, you know what, that's not for me. I'm just not good at that. Growth mindset, let's do it. Let's try. Even if it takes me longer than I expect, I'll still do it, and I'm sure I'll achieve it. Fixed mindset people give up easily. So as soon as something gets hard, they start thinking, oh, maybe like this isn't for me. Maybe I should just leave. Growth mindset individuals persist despite obstacles. Fixed mindset see effort as fruitless. It doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm still going to be in the same place. Growth mindset see effort as a path to mastery. There's something that I'm doing a lot of thinking about, which is mastery-based learning. And it's the idea that the more you work on something and the more you ask questions about it, the more you're going to be able to find where your gaps in your knowledge are and what you need to focus on. And this is also super important. I know I'm going a bit off growth and fixed mindset, but it's super important because when you're learning at home or online, you have less interaction with others. And so you're not able, or you don't have as much interactions to point out where your gaps in your knowledge are. So you have to start, there's several ways of doing it, but some ways that we'll talk about in community building later in a bit is having people who are very interested in what you're learning, or by teaching others. So those are two ways for you to figure out where you are in a mastery learning route. So fixed mindset ignore useful feedback, whereas growth mindset learn from criticism. And fixed mindset individuals are threatened by other success. They see someone who's successful as a threat and they avoid them. Whereas growth mindset people are inspired by other success. They ask them to be their mentors, or they ask them for advice, and they try to learn from them. So our mindsets shape whether we believe we can learn and change and grow or not. So the way of thinking about this growth mindset model is similar to when you're exercising. So your brain responds to exercise the same way your muscles do. So whenever your brain tackles challenges, you force it to grow. And the more challenges you do, the better your brain is in learning and also in having that growth mindset. So just to recap, a person with a growth mindset believes that if they put in the time and effort, they'll be able to learn anything they want to. So something that's also key with growth mindset individuals, and this helps a lot with procrastination, which is also a much more apparent in people who are learning at home or who are learning online, is they focus on the process when they want to complete a task. They don't focus on the end result. They enjoy the process, and they focus on things or ways of learning they truly enjoy. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm a visual learner, or I like listening to things, I like reading. And that's fine. If you find a way that's better for you and that you enjoy more, that's a way of doing it. I actually think that everyone has a preferred way of learning. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use the other ways, but it just means that if you have a way of that you prefer, then find resources that are good in that area. And the process includes the strategy or different approaches you've used for learning, your focus or concentration, your planning and how you plan out your learning, and then perseverance, effort, and determination. So all of this is what you should be focusing on when you're learning and trying to instill that growth mindset. And then we move on to the language. So when you're in class or you have teachers, then it's much easier to get those interactions where the language has changed. We need to be aware of the language we talk to ourselves when we're learning online. So what we say to ourselves. So instead of saying, I can't do this, or I don't want to do this, or I haven't done this, or it's all about you will get there if you put the effort in. So you haven't got there yet. I haven't done this yet. I don't want to do this now, but I will do it next week. So you change the language you talk to yourself, because the way you talk to yourself internally dictates how you feel about the challenge you're facing. And by changing the language, you motivate yourself, or you change your subconscious mind, so it enables you to get those tasks done. And you should see those struggles as a chance to improve your skills and your understanding and how you talk to yourself. An area which we don't have the scope of getting into is metacognition. And this is your internal dialogue and how you talk to yourself when you're learning. So all those doubts and those thoughts, which is basically what we're going on to here, the language of growth. And what you find is people who are very, very good in different areas, they have a certain metacognition for that area. But it all comes down to the language they use with themselves and how they see that challenge and how they reframe it in a way that allows them to keep on going and to persist. Okay, so now we're going to move to focused versus diffuse thinking. So If you imagine a flashlight, and the flashlight has two settings. It can immensely focus a beam into one small area, or it can spread its light as powerfully, so much more broad. And our brain works exactly in the same way. So we can switch between focused learning or focused thinking or diffuse thinking, and both are critical for learning. You cannot do one without the other. So focused thinking is narrow, whereas diffuse thinking is broad and more general. Focused thinking is targeted, and diffuse thinking is more conceptual. So it may be easier if I give an example of focus versus diffuse learning. So focused thinking is, for example, you sitting down in front of a math problem and trying to solve it. So really focusing on it and trying to get it done. Diffuse thinking is when you leave that math problem and go for a walk. So your subconscious mind is still thinking about it in the background. But what you'll find is when you come back to that math problem after that break, you're more likely to solve it. And this is because your brain is still going and still working on this problem, even if you're not aware about it. So focused thinking is tactical, whereas diffuse thinking is strategic. And focused thinking is necessary for deep work. So this is, as I said, like when you're dealing with a math problem or you're trying to learn a lecture, you're really focusing on it. Whereas diffuse thinking uncovers meaning and connections between different concepts. So you learn math and you learn design. And then when you're diffuse thinking, this is where the links happen between those two concepts, or the concepts within those two areas. So we're going to do another activity. As you can tell, I love activities. So consider this sentence. This sentence contains 3 errors. Now take 30 seconds to think about what those 3 errors are. I'm going to just give you 10 seconds because they're pretty apparent. Well, 2 are very easy to spot, and because to do this, you're going to be diving into focused thinking. You're going to be looking at it and you're going to be trying to achieve. Yes, we have S and E from Alia. What's the third? I'm just going to give another 10 seconds. So the third error is that actually the sentence is not true. There's only 2 errors. And this is a diffuse way of thinking. So you step back and think about it abstractly, and you realize that there's actually only 2 errors, not 3. So another very important thing that people tend to not think about is sleep. I know everyone knows that sleep is super important, but there are different stages of sleep that allow you to reconstruct what you're thinking about and all the concepts you've learned through the day. So what happens with memory goes in. So when you start building those memory neurons in your brain, when you sleep, especially in your REM cycle, you start deconstructing all those chunks of knowledge. We're going to come in chunking again, but chunks are basically groups of ideas that you've chunked together. So how to do algebra, and then how to do an algebraic. You think of addition, multiplication, whatever it may be, that's calculus, but you know what I mean. So when you sleep, you reconstruct it and you actually form those links much more concretely within the brain. And if we come back to the analogy of muscles and exercising in the brain, so you can't keep on exercising your muscles by constantly lifting weights or running, etc. Your brain needs time to rest before it can be used again. And that's when you start repairing all those neurons in a way that's much more effective for your learning and for your brain. So chunking, which I just touched on just before, are pieces of information that are connected by their common meaning. So chunking information helps the brain run more effectively. So as you learn more and more, our brain naturally starts chunking all the knowledge. So everything you learn in math when you're in school, you probably don't remember every single detail of that. But when given a math problem, you're able to do it. And that's because you've chunked the knowledge into a much more abstract piece of information within your brain. And now once we chunk that idea or concept, we need to remember we don't need to remember those underlying detail. We've got the main meaning behind it. Now, the next step for chunking. So when the brain chunks all this information, for it to continue to remember that, we need to recall that information. And the more we recall it and the more space that recall is, the better we remember things. So recall is mentally retrieving the main ideas of your learning material, and it helps build new chunks. So as you recall more and more information, your brain naturally starts figuring out what it needs to remember and what it needs to put into a new chunk. So think of it like Tetris. you have small chunks, and then you build on top of it into a bigger chunk, and you're recalling either the big chunk or the smaller chunks between them, and they're depending on what you're doing. So when you're studying, don't just passively reread information, practice recalling it. And this is after a day, after a week, after a month, and it will naturally happen if you're looking at the same subject over and over again. So we do a lot of work on software engineering and coding. And what you'll find is the first time we introduce, I don't know, objects or variables or functions or whatever it may be, it doesn't really stick. There's a chunk of information that's in the brain, but once the student has touched on it 6, 7, 8, 10 times over the course of 3 months, it's pretty clear in their mind what a function is, what a variable is, what a data type is. And this is because they're recalling and their brain is building those chunks, and they're sleeping, obviously. So their brain is restructuring all that knowledge in an effective way. So we're coming up to the last 10 minutes of the talk, and I just want to touch on a few tools and a few things just to keep in mind as extra things you can think about. So the first one is the use of analogies and real-world examples. So this is the 4-step framework for analogies. So I touched on muscles with the brain. So we introduce the concept. So I'm saying the brain is similar to muscles. Then you think about how the analogy matches. So I've talked about how they're similar. You need to give the muscles time to relax by sleeping. Then you have to note the similarity between so that's what we're talking about. So you have each concept and then the similarities, but you also have to be able to explain how the analogy is unlike the target concept. Otherwise, you just confuse yourself and you're going to have a lot of problems recalling this information. So clarity on the analogy and its relationship and examples. The next one is a very well-known concept in educational psychology, which is the protege effect. And it states that the best way to learn something is to teach to someone else. So I encourage you to write blogs when you're learning, make teaching videos, answer questions on knowledge, help other students. And this will solidify what you do know and point out what you don't know. Problem solving. So also just a quick tool, a quick framework for those who would like to use this. Step 1, understanding the problem. Read the problem, discuss the inputs and outputs of the problem, and try to explain the problem to someone else. So this problem could even be like, I'm not figuring out this topic. So you break down the problem, you're like, okay, so this is what I'm not understanding. You break it down to smaller components and figure out where exactly is your lack of understanding and where do you need more clarity on. Create a simple solution on how you're going to do this. So how am I going to understand that? What books am I going to look at? What areas am I going to research? Who am I going to ask? And then once you have an understanding, how do you optimize that? And this is not only about a certain thing you want to understand, but also how you're going to learn in general. So what is your process? What are the habits you're forming? And how are you forming those? So something that's super important, and what we find is a big difference with online learning and in-class learning, a big difference is the communication and community you have. And I feel like from all the conversations that I've had about online learning and in-person learning, this has been the biggest topic that I come across. So online learning makes it difficult to build a bond with those you study with. It's much harder to build that sense of community. When you're in class, you're going into class, you're talking to people, you have the interactions, you can discuss things in person. When you're online, it's much harder. And depending on how you're learning and what you're doing, those people may not even be in a program. You might be learning on your own. So this is something to always keep in mind, that the social aspect of learning is the hardest part of online learning. And communication. So the normal cues and subtle parts of communications are missed. So if you're in class and you're learning English grammar, it's much easier to have that conversation explained. If it's in written communication, it's much harder. So communication and community are two key things to always keep in mind when you're learning online, especially when you're interacting with others or with your teachers or lecturers or whoever it may be. So some tips for community is try to find an online community of people who are trying to learn the same area. So this is a difficulty with online learning, but also provides an opportunity. If you're learning online, you have access to communities of people who are trying to learn the same area, worldwide. So you're not now limited to your geography where you are. You can connect on meetup groups. You can connect on Discord or Slack workspaces on areas that you are truly passionate about. And there may not be that many people in where you are that are learning the same thing as you, but globally, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands. And you can connect with those people. And then form a bi-weekly or weekly meetup to discuss and brainstorm. And it could just be a social setting. So it doesn't have to be studying per se, but connecting with those people who are going through the same thing that you're going through, and that sense of cohesion and that group dynamic that you'll be able to be exposed to is super important for your learning online. And being able to discuss that or even just relate to those other people who are going through it is amazing. Communication. So Rosa mentioned this in the beginning of this. In voice calls, always have your video on. It's just more effective. So all those visual cues and that lack of understanding that happens because you're on an audio call is surpassed when you have your video on. People can start seeing your expression. You start getting much closer to in-person communication. You give more context than usual. Always assume that you have to give much more context and much more information on how you're thinking and why you're thinking and what approach you had to a certain area when you're going online, because they don't have that. They aren't going through the same thing that you're going on a day-to-day. You're not in class with them every day where they can see what you're doing. They don't have that context. And also, a lot of the communication can be asynchronous, which is a benefit of online learning. So you don't have to all be in the same place at the same time. You communicate in different time zones, in different platforms. And there's a lot of tooling. I mean, we use Zoom a lot. We also use Slack. For coding, we use GitHub, but there's a lot of tools out there depending on what you're learning. So finally, I'm only going to touch on this briefly. And if you're planning your own learning, you want to start setting your own goals for learning. So I'm going to go through the growth framework and then setting objectives for Go. And this will literally take just a few minutes before we wrap up. So the growth framework is a framework used by Google. And it's a framework for you to track and figure out your goals, what you want to achieve, what you're currently doing, and why it's relevant to achieving those goals. And then options is what you could do to improve. So you can brainstorm how to improve what you're currently doing, and then what you will do. So when it comes to learning, I want to learn how to play the guitar. What's happening right now? I have a guitar, but I'm not using it. What we could do to improve? So a big problem is activation energy. So some people will say, oh, it takes me so much time to get up, prepare my guitar, tune it, etc. Have the guitar ready. Have it always tuned. Have it always in front of you. Have the notes always in front of you. Have your learning platform. And have that always available. So whenever you want to jump on and do 5 minutes of guitar practice, it's super easy and there's a much lower activation energy. And so these are just different options, and then you decide on what you will do. So that's the growth framework. OKR framework, also used by Google. So an objective, what do you want to achieve? And then the key result. And these needs to be measurable. So we're going to come back to the guitar example. So I want to learn how to play guitar in the next 3 months. So what's measurable? I want to try and play 3 songs within the next 3 months. I want to be able to learn to read music and be able to learn music from this one band, or I don't know, like whoever you want to play from. And then the third one could be, I also want to record my music and share it and share it online on YouTube. So keep it measurable and keep it time bound. Okay, so just to wrap up, key concepts. So prioritize and free up your mind. Make a space in your home for learning, because you don't have you're doing everything in one space. You're learning, you're living. Make sure you have that balance, and you're able to build those boundaries into your habits, where you know when you're going to be learning and where in your house. Build good habits. Change your mindset and language and how you think about learning. Make sure you take breaks and have diffused modes of thinking about what you're learning. Sleep well, so you can restructure the chunks in your brain. Even when you're learning, chunk your learning. So say I'm going to learn this concept for the next 20 minutes, and also practice recall. So if you learn for 30 minutes and then you take a 15-minute break, for the first 2 minutes, try and recall a few concepts of what you learned before. And then a week later or a month later. And you keep on doing that so you remember the main aspects of what you're learning. and then teach others. And the most important thing is to have fun with it all. Okay, so if your learning isn't fun, you're not going to stick to it. So try to enjoy it, try to make it fun, and you're going to be able to learn more effectively. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take questions.